Welcome to Jews on Film. My name is Daniel Zana. I'm a video editor and documentary filmmaker. And with me, as always, is the Mazik of my life, Harry. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'll take it. My name is Harry Adensasser. I am a former film major, current Jewish film podcaster. And we're delighted to be joined by a great guest this week. So our guest today is an LA-based producer whose production company, Boulder Light Pictures, has produced several films, including the Jewish horror film, The Vigil, which we'll be discussing today, the action thriller Becky, starring Kevin James and Lulu Wilson, Wild Indian, starring Michael Grey Eyes and Jesse Eisenberg, and Gone in the Night, starring Winona Ryder. Their most recent release, Barbarian, written and directed by Zach Kreger and starring Georgina Campbell, Bill Skarsgård, and Justin Long, opened as the #1 movie in America before going on to make nearly $45 million at the box office. JD Lifshitz, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Jews on Film.
Thank you so much, guys. Wow, what an introduction.
Well, you know, we wanted to roll out the red carpet. You know, I feel like it's totally appropriate in this case. Yeah.
Yeah, not always do we get such a high-profile guest, so it's really is. I did mean it when I said pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I'll take it.
No hard feelings, Harry. By the way, about the Mazik comment, I meant that in it's like, you know, lighthearted. Anyway,
yeah. Sometimes I wonder when people listen if they haven't yet seen the movie or are familiar, and they just think that some of our comments are a little bit out of pocket. But hopefully, that'll all make sense to them once we run through the plot a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to start just by asking you a couple questions, JD. So specifically, a question that we often ask our guests and that I was really interested to hear your thoughts on is, what would you say was your relationship with both film and, you know, being Jewish film growing up? And I think you have a very unique situation where you've really, in some ways, married the two through your career. So how has that kind of developed, and what inspired you in some ways towards the production career that you've embarked on today and the movie, and all this will obviously tie back into our discussion of the movie.
Well, Baruch Hashem, you know, I grew up in the Five Towns, which is a pretty, I think it's like, I call it Hitler's nightmare. You know,
oh, God.
very, very Jewish enclave. On Long Island, and I always loved movies, specifically genre movies, as did Rafi, my partner. We would make videos together when we were kids. And we were the two, you know, kind of genre fanatics that would watch movies. I mean, when we were coming of age, it was like Hostel and the Hills Have Eyes remake and so on. But really, in terms of my love of movies, I mean, I think film is an opportunity to communicate telepathically, right? It's an implicitly populist medium that I always felt like a connection to. I probably have like sensory processing or something. Like that's probably like the clinical answer why I'm so attracted to stories in general. But there was always just a profound ephemeral connection that I felt to entertainment, quote unquote, and storytelling, and specifically cinema. It's kind of a dreamer's paradise, I would say. So I don't know. I moved to LA and we just started working on it. And in terms of like marrying those two things, I mean, I'm a Orthodox Jew, so I do my best to keep halacha, and I have rabbis that I consult with, both in various aspects of my life, and I find that the two are related. I don't really like Jewish movies, which is going to be very funny considering the movie we're supposed to talk about today.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I find like Keeping Up with the Steins to be like more offensive than anything Mel Gibson has ever said.
We have not yet covered that one, but maybe in the future you'll come back and we'll talk about it.
No, there's like so many. I mean, there's a movie called When Do We Eat that I think is its own hate crime. I really, really loathe Jewish movies. I mean, A Serious Man was the first movie I saw when I turned 17 with my ID. Like that was that. Right. That's different. The Vigil is very inspired by the opening of A Serious Man,
right?
Specifically, it's like a spiritual successor, I should say, in a sense. I mean, obviously, the thesis of the movies are very different, but I feel about most Jewish movies the way most people probably feel about the jazz singer today. You know, the Joel original, not the Richard Fleischer remake.
Yeah, I mean, they're not all bad. Like, I mean, as someone, I feel compelled to take a defense of Jewish film as someone who co-hosts a podcast here and say, like, I want to just say that all of what you said is like incredible. I want to say it's not all bad romantic comedies with Ben Stiller and Dustin Hoffman as his like corny ass dad.
You're referring to Keeping the Faith. That's the Ben Stiller comedy, and then
any of them,
which is the one.
Sure, yeah.
No, listen, I'm not saying that they're all bad. I mean, it's like they're mostly bad. I don't think it's like, I'm trying to think of like really good Jewish movies. Well, I just find them, it's very rare. I mean, like a lot of my favorite Jewish movies are like movies that are about Jews made by non-Jews, right? Like Casino or Inglourious Bastards. Like those are like my favorite movies,
sure.
Jewish movies in a sense. And like they're, they couldn't be less. Fabelmans is really good. That's a Jewish movie that's really, really good.
Yep. Made by a Jew. Yeah. Starring non-Jews.
I want,
there you go. Go ahead, Harry.
And I want to ask do you think that there's a path towards doing the sort of positive representation or exploring Jewish themes or Jewish ideas in a more positive way? And it's just, there's bad precedent?
Yeah, no, that's why we made The Vigil. I do think there's ways to, I mean, listen, like I loved Adam Sandler. If you want to call Adam Sandler movies Jewish, with the exception of 8 Crazy Nights.
We have.
I love those movies.
Uncut Gems. I mean, that's a hugely, Uncut Gems is a hugely Jewish movie in my perspective.
Uncut Gems to me, that's culturally Jewish. I think that like Uncut Gems to me, that's a different type of like, so if we're considering a movie like that Jewish, then I think that we're, then like War Dogs is a Jewish movie. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like to a different set. And that's why when I say Casino, specific, but Casino is the least Jewish movie that has some semblance of Jewish identity that I've ever seen. It's one of my favorite films of all time, Casino. Yeah. Don Rickles is the only Jewish thing about that movie, you know? And maybe Kevin Pollak, but Don Rickles is enough to like make it he's so big that he makes a Jewish element kind of appear.
Yeah, definitely. I think you got to listen to the podcast because like all of what we do is take things that are not super Jewish and pull out and get on the stretch train and we make it Jewish and we kind of,
Your job's going to be very easy today.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Today this is a layup for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Like Woody Allen movies are Jewish. I like Woody Allen. I mean, movies, like I think that certainly like some of them, those aren't like, what I traditionally think of when I think of Jewish themed films, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of a horse of a different color. I just mean like there was a theater growing up called the Malvern that was like on Long Island, which is like the quote unquote art house theater. The movies that played there are like the movies that I talk about hating. Like they're movies that are made for they're movies. They're like quote unquote nice movies made for Jews to like incestually laugh at their own jokes and heritage. And it's like kitschy to me, it's like bar mitzvah humor. And that's That's not something that I'm particularly attracted to. Or like, February dramas with all due respect to her Rachel Weisz. You know what I'm saying? Like that's very much not what I care about when it comes to like, or like those movies are not particularly interesting to me. But movies that have elements, of Jewish characters, sure. Why not?
Yeah. It sounds to me a little bit like the distinction we've made in the past between sort of Jewish context when you're just inhabiting a world that's Jewish that is not telling you it's Jewish and it's not trying to tell you the lesson or make fun of itself, but it's just like, this is just the truth of the experience of these people, which in some ways, as explicitly Jewish as the movie we're discussing today is, it never really is apologizing for its Jewishness. It's just, this is a story that's happening in a Jewish world. So it kind of just moves on with that. So I recognize the distinction that I think you're trying to pull here.
And I consider my work here done. I've convinced you some Jewish films are not that bad. What do you think? Can we agree to that?
Goalposts
move.
Yeah.
No, I know. I'm just busting chops here.
Before we move on,
go for it.
And at the risk of embarrassing you, JD, our guest, but I just wanted to point out, I loved what you were saying in the beginning about just sort of seeing, not necessarily, or just clinging to those models that you had of, your way into the film industry. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you briefly, but this is obviously, for me, this is not the first time I'm talking to you because I spoke to you about 7-8 years ago in a conversation that I'm sure you don't remember, that I was put in touch with you as just someone. It was just, we know each other, through cousins and stuff, but it was just someone put me in touch. I was, in high school, hoping to break my way into the film industry. And in some ways, this podcast can be considered a spiritual sequel of that. And you were the name that was thrown to me as the guy who, grew up in the 5 towns, went there and did it. And it's just exciting to be talking to you. I appreciated you sort of clinging to your inspirations because, again, at the risk of embarrassing you, you were one of those for me way back when. So it's great to have you on.
I got very nervous when you said, that's not embarrassing at all. You do that all day. I thought
we could keep running with that.
Yeah, no, I thought you were going to bring up like a high school video I made or something. And that would
actually, can you cue the video, Harry? We got no.
Yeah, too bad this is an audio medium.
Yeah, exactly.
Would have been good stuff.
Again, I think that like, and when I say Woody Allen, again, I'm talking about like the movies, not the, I don't want to. I'm not.
Yeah, gotcha.
But the early Woody Allen movies are like implicitly Jewish. They're not always explicitly Jewish,
Sure. Yeah, I think the things. Totally. Yeah. Anyway, I'm beating a dead horse here, but
I don't think we disagree. I think we're just we're looking at that. It's two different prisms by which.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jewish picture.
Yeah, I think some of the more interesting films are the ones that are not super on the nose. Like, we still have not done Fiddler on the Roof because, like, one
of my least favorite movies of all time.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And that's, I think some of the other things, like we'll watch like an Elliot Gould movie, like The Long Goodbye. And like that, we are like teasing out elements of the Jewishness or, like A Serious Man or Uncut Gems or I don't know, all sorts of, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but I totally hear what you're saying about that sort of shticky bar mitzvah humor.
It's like a routine in the Catskills, right? It's like you would imagine that sort of.
Well, and by the way, some Yiddish routine in the Catskills. Like I love Don Rickles, like he's my favorite of all time. Sure. That's good Jewish humor because it's not apologizing for anything and it's not patting people. It's not giving out participation trophies to the audience.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm so pretentious. This is repulsive. You probably lost all your viewers in this prelude.
It's good to kind of get a sense of where everyone's head is at. I think as we jump into the movie itself and discuss it, we'll have lots of questions for you about the making of the film and thought processes behind it. But do you know what time it is?
I think it's time for the IMDb summary. So,
you got it, dude.
We've got a good short one here and just set the scene for the film. And it reads, a man providing overnight watch to a deceased member of his former Orthodox Jewish community finds himself opposite a malevolent entity.
Ooh.
I thought we were doing the movie where the little girl kills the Nazis.
Which one's that?
Not Becky. That's a joke for the two people listening who one of them being my business partner, the other one being my assistant. Listening that are both like completists and have seen Becky.
Got it. Okay. Awesome.
You could do a double feature.
Totally. So, we're going to be discussing The Vigil, like we said. Thank you, Harry, for discussing or for providing a nice summary. I feel like we do get Orthodox Jewish in the summary right away. It's kind of unavoidable. There's a lot of films, JD, that it's such a Jewish film, and yet they somehow manage to omit the fact that the main character is Jewish, living in a Jewish world and in other movies. So I'm glad that they mentioned it here. Why don't we take a quick break and we'll come right back and we'll kind of dive into our plot of the film, The Vigil. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are here with JD Lifshitz to talk about The Vigil. Harry, do you want to get us kicked off and get this story started?
Sure. So as always, we're going to run through the plot beat by beat, kind of discuss each part as we get up to it. The only difference being this week, we're sitting down with one of the producers who probably spent a lot more time thinking about the film than we had. So JD, I invite you to call us out if we get any details wrong, throw it in, just help us out here. But we're going to do our as best as we can to just kind of give, a couple of the beats from the outline. So the film begins with some text on screen that basically explains the role of a Jewish shomer. We then witness a young boy as he's forced by a Nazi soldier to shoot a young woman. In the background, a shadowy figure approaches them. The film then cuts to a modern day where we meet the support group that's in a meeting of formerly Hasidic Jews who have, clearly gone a little bit more secular, left a little bit, and they're learning how to acclimate to this new secular world. So in that sequence, we're introduced to Yaakov, who's the lead protagonist of the film, and he shares that he's struggling to find a job and pay his rent. While he's packing up to leave, he's approached by Sarah, who invites him to get coffee the next day. But that really just sets the scene for the world that we're going to inhabit.
Yeah, I think it's worth calling out for those not familiar, the idea, we're not watching the movie now, you're listening to our podcast discuss the movie, but the idea of the shomer is someone who will sort of watch over a dead body before it is taken away to the burial service. And you're essentially watching it to kind of protect it from any sort of malevolent spirits. Anything JD to kind of start us off about this section? Thank
you so much. It feels so craven to talk about my own movie. Truly crass, but that is the lot of a producer. Ultimately, so
it's a good move. Good move.
So it's funny because I did a series. Joe Dante, who's the director of Gremlins, and among others, he very graciously had me do a series called Trailers from Hell for him. And the first season that I did it, he said, you can talk about one of your own films. And I said, I am not that shameless. And then I found out that Quentin was doing this, and I was like, okay, yeah, I've become that shameless. I did one for the Vigil that'll be airing soon, I think. But this is also part of that re-release press tour that I'm doing. So it's really great to talk about the movie again, and kind of, we just got to screen the movie, the QC, the print recently, which is extremely emotional for me. Thank God, very grateful. But it had me, re-appreciating so much that I love about the movie. The movie really is a personal film to us, and it was a turning point for us. And so to get to open it up again is so fun. We love this movie. I'll just, now having set the table like that and alienated everybody with my nonsense. This movie to us, we wanted to make something that was extremely authentic. We would jokingly pitch it as like Ingmar Bergman meets James Wan, right? Give you the commercial scare set pieces and tension and atmosphere of a great horror picture. Or really tell a trauma, like an extreme, again, this was before trauma had been so played out. I think now it's maybe people are ready for a break, but at the time this felt really cool. An intergenerational trauma picture against the backdrop of a really exciting, scary horror film. And so, that meant feeling like you could, reach out and touch the movie. It needed to feel organic and alive. And so we worked very hard to we had several advisors from the ultra-Orthodox community on the picture, and a lot of the cast were from that community and had left. Dave Davis, who gives the incredible performance at the center of the picture, was not from that community and learned Yiddish and really dove in.
Couldn't tell. That's cool.
Yeah, it felt really great.
Yeah, and so we opened that movie. The movie opens at a footsteps meeting, which, like, you know what footsteps is. It's like you said, it transitions people out of that community. And I never felt like I'd seen a movie that didn't, I never felt like I'd seen a movie about this community that wasn't either like victimizing or fetishizing or condemning, the practices. And to me, that's kind of, that all of that I find kind of offensive and pandering. And so to do just an authentic movie where this is that world, we're not being schmaltzy and false, but simultaneously we're not passing judgment on other people and their and so on. And so we're just trying to tell the most true story possible. And so that, especially to start at a footsteps meeting, which can very, very easily you're playing with fire to a certain aspect of that community. Mm-hmm. And to be sensitive there was very important to us. And it's totally foreign to most people who don't know anything about the community. Fun behind the scenes fact, that scene was shot at Adam Margolis, who was one of the other producers on the movie, his apartment in Brooklyn. Oh, nice. But anyways, that feels like a good place to start.
If you're playing Jews on Film bingo at home, you can put a check over intergenerational trauma because it does seem to come up fairly often. So for those of you keeping score at home, JD said the magic words. Harry, over to you.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to some of that because I loved a lot of what you said. I think, something that I will probably say a couple times this episode, but I really felt watching this movie was it really felt like a very sort of by Jews for Jews. And in a way that, like you're saying, it didn't feel like it was pandering. It didn't feel like it was coming from this outsider perspective. And it's funny because in the opening conversation, you spoke about, those very sort of for Jews films that are, inside jokey. And I recognize what's so disagreeable about that. But I think in this case, it really felt like it was just very trusting of its audience. I think it does that. At first, it needs to do a lot. It has to be expository because, like you said, people just haven't seen, who aren't familiar with those types of meetings, don't know what's going on. And I clocked a couple of lines from people saying, they should really teach us this. This is hard. No one ever taught us how to get a job. And just enough to, I think, set the stage for.
By the way, just to touch on what you're saying, I find all that stuff cringy when I watch it. And to me, that is sort of my least favorite scene in the movie. But it just speaks to my cynicism because and also my contextually understanding of the community, because most people that I speak to, they are obsessed with that scene because they've never seen anything like it, right? So they're not talking it as exposition because they truly need the exposition in a way that you don't, right? So it is a different experience. But yes, I agree that scene is sort of the hardest for me to watch. I'm not kidding. Like everything that happens from when he leaves that meeting, and I hate everything. Like we're my partner is cynical, but everything that happens when they leave that meeting, with the exception of the flashbacks or the first flashback, I adore in the movie. Like for the most part, there's like so few things I would change. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that first scene, I think you're probably right about it, but it also, I think, gets away with being, expository because it definitely balances it with a lot of like and I don't have them all written down in front of me, but just a couple of lines there for someone, like us, I think, who are just more familiar with this world, can pick up on the Yiddish and the language and, even the accents that just felt so familiar. Mm-hmm. Like, I think for us, you're getting this. They're giving you, they're not spoon feeding you the rest of the world. You have the broader context, but I just felt a level of trust, and that's throughout the film. We'll talk about, the times that he's reciting Tehillim and the times where, he says Shema at the end, where we're not saying people say Shema when they think they might die because it's supposed to be there's none of that context or even explaining what it means. It's just, some of it is like, if you understand this really feels lived in the world and it makes sense. And if you don't, it still can pass as an effective moment, which, I can't speak to that perspective completely, but that was what I got from it.
Totally.
Innately, I think a lot of it's instinctual. I mean, we sold, fun fact, MM2 Entertainment in Singapore, and I think CJ was involved in this in Korea. They got the Indonesian remake rights to make a Muslim version of it in Indonesia.
Ooh, okay.
And I think that speaks to just the universal nature of the movie, right? It's not. You don't have to know. We very consciously did not spoon feed the audience, and I don't think you need it. I think that you understand based on context and style what is happening when it is happening.
Totally. Yeah. I think it helps to set the stage, kind of as we kind of continue on through the plot. After Yaakov leaves the meeting, he's approached by Reb Shulam, who's played awesomely by Menashe Lustig. And, he was a member of his community, and he wants to talk to him. So he comes over to him and asks him to work as a shomer, which is, as we said, someone to watch over a dead body, over someone named Reuben Litvak. And he was a Holocaust survivor who recently passed away. And Reb Shulam hopes that, in a not so subtle way, tries to bring him back to the faith. And Yaakov is a little bit reluctant, but, he sort of, through the grapevine, Reb Shulam knows that he's kind of hard pressed and doesn't have the money. So they, in a very clever kind of like negotiating back and forth, he finally gets $400 to the job, and he reluctantly agrees to do it.
200? I'll do it for 5.
300.
Bist du gekommen zu mir? Emes?
Ja.
Du bist desperate, die darfst mich. Emes?
Ja.
Okay, so 5. Ich habe es schon getan. People in the community that don't have any family and no friends. It's me, okay? I'm watching the body.
Kann ich geben 400, aber nicht mehr.
Okay.
Ja, a deal?
Okay, yeah, deal.
So Yaakov and Shulam arrive at the house, and he meets Mrs. Litvak, who Reb Shulam says is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And, right away, she tells Yaakov that he's wrong for the part. And I forgot to mention earlier, but Reb Shulam said someone else had gone and had left kind of almost immediately. They said they were too scared. So Yaakov shrugs off this sort of suggestion that he's not the right person for the job, and Shulam informs him that the Chevra Kadisha, or the burial services, will be arriving in about 5 hours. So that's sort of our our ticking clock that we're kind of looking at throughout the entire movie. And yeah, so now the sort of plot is in motion. We start, and he starts out his shomer duties, but I'll pause here because I think before we kind of like dive into all the creepiness that's going to happen, I kind of wanted to get some thoughts here.
I love this scene so much. Like, I love the sequence of them walking through Brooklyn is so atmospheric and exciting to me, and it feels like a classic austere genre piece. Like, it feels to me, I often think of like maybe a Hammer horror movie in a weird way. I know it's obviously and by the same token, like a 70s New York movie, like it's
that's what I got. Yeah.
Like there's and not even a 70s New York horror movie, like just like it could be like a, right. I could think even of like, not Taxi Driver per se, but maybe like a Bill Lustig movie. I mean, there's a grind to where they're walking around, and there's something alive about it. And I think the Safdies capture this really well. Certainly something like Good Time, but I think it does such a great job. And I can say this because I didn't direct the movie, so it's really just kudos to Keith Thomas and Zach Cooperstein, our DP. But like, there's and Dave and Menashe, who are firebrands in this. But like, there's an energy to it, and there's a scope that buys you hopefully the goodwill of the audience to then be confined to a house. Like it makes the movie feel far grander. It's just, I find that sequence intoxicating. When we made the print for the new Bev, the sequence I was most excited to see was that, because I was like, that looked filmic to me, even on the DCP. Like, and it's not, we shot it on the Arri Alexa. It wasn't, we didn't shoot on film. But to me, that there was something just so cozy about that. And I just think Menashe and Dave are both just knocked it out of the park in their performances. And it's really funny to watch two Jews negotiate at the start.
Right. Very Jewish scene.
I think that scene also does everything you were saying in the beginning of not kind of objectifying these characters and making them little puppets sort of in these rooms, but it opens them up and it gives them a world, and everything about their conversation is completely respectful. I mean, we know that Reb Shulam is obviously, he has this long game. He's trying to convince him to come back. And you can imagine they've had many conversations like this, but not in a way that's so, vicious or aggressive. Like it feels like these people had a relationship before. They're continuing that relationship to whatever degree it exists, since Yaakov has left the faith, so to speak. But it's just all clocked in a way that I think is respectful. It's part of it's real world, and it's this night was not supposed to be as momentous as ultimately it would become. It was really just going to be one of their classic walk and talks through the city. The one other thing that I wanted to clock from this sequence that I was very excited to hear your thoughts about was that line that you mentioned, Daniel, where he says, where Reb Shulam tries to tell him, sitting the vigil brings you closer to the community, and I know he says it's mamish God's plan that you're going to be doing this, and again, love that. And I know we said, generational trauma or intergenerational trauma is obviously a huge part of this movie. And it's a huge part of the Jewish experience, for better or for worse. There's a reason that it's captured in a lot of these movies we discuss, because especially from the Holocaust, World War II, which has, been inherited by generations of Jews. And for the first time in history, where enough generations removed where maybe we won't all know someone who was personally affected, but that's something that stays.
By the way, I don't know, we're both wearing glasses.
All of us.
I'm saying like that people don't realize what a population bottleneck is, but it's most Jews are oftentimes, that's what the technical term, but Jews are oftentimes nearsighted or lactose intolerant or so on because of genocide.
Yeah. Wow.
Intermarry, meaning they had to constantly marry their closer and closer relatives. When you have a small pool and you keep swiping people off, and they have to inbreed and inbreed and inbreed, you get genetic mutations. Essentially.
Certainly on the Ashkenaz side, I've heard that. Yeah.
No, it is the Ashkenaz side. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That makes total. I mean, that's awful and makes a lot of sense. And that's just, there's a reason that trauma is so much a part of a lot of the Jewish stories that we've seen in a lot of our traditions and holidays. I mean, it's so deeply rooted in there. And I think that creates this tension of, it's the tension of the movie, is how much are we supposed to align ourselves with that and empathize with some of that trauma that maybe we didn't experience personally when we're living in I think a better time and place, and how much do we need to cut ourselves off? So this one line, I think, foreshadows just a little bit of that relationship when he says, sitting the vigil, that'll bring you closer. Like, does, him syncing himself up with this death, with this process of watching over the dead body, and ultimately that brings him closer to the trauma. Is that him bringing him closer to his Jewishness? Like, is that what we're saying is your relationship
good
there?
And I like that.
And then I don't know what the movie's answered, and I guess we'll discuss how the movie answers that.
Yeah.
But, he talks about this is God's plan to bring you closer. And it's just such an interesting avenue that the way to get close is to, deal with the death of our ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. Come have a little cup of trauma here, like a nice warm bowl of trauma to get the
perspective. Yeah, I think that for me, there's a lot of ways to read what Reb Shulam is saying. I think that he's as a character is probably speaking more on the idea of like, as it says in Pirkei Avos, like a mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. So like if he's going to do this mitzvah, he's probably going to want to do more mitzvahs. He's probably going to go to Shacharis and so on. And I think that like, that's, you touched on something earlier that like Reb Shulam is not nefarious. He's not trying. There's no big reveal. We joked about the twist of the movie was he was setting him up. There's no. Reb Shulam really does care about Yaakov. He cares about him as a human being. You know what I'm saying? And he wants him.
Absolutely.
And Yaakov recognizes that, and that's why their relationship is so tense and so fractured, because they're sitting on completely opposite ends of the table. But there is this chess match of like mutual respect versus kind of concerned empathy.
I mean, I've been there before. Like, I certainly have had, rabbis who were in a warm, loving way, encouraging me to do more, to participate more. And, I think sometimes, I'm only speaking for myself, but sometimes, you have like a knee-jerk reaction to someone trying to like loop you in and ask you to do more than what you're comfortable doing. So I don't know. It felt familiar to me. I'd be like, are you sure you don't want to come to like services? Do you want to come? And no, I'm good. I got other things going on, so I felt that a little bit. Yeah.
I think it's like proselytization versus sincere care, right?
Sure.
I think that's something that we were touching on too. Like I don't know. Like I think it's a complicated thing. Are you viewing what you're doing as sort of a point system, or like a way to step on a pedestal and look down? I saw The Whale last night. And very different movie. Similarities to The Vigil, quite a few actually. Certainly in the staging of the picture. But what's your? I think everything in life is boiled down. I say this quite a bit, but like I think everything like just boiled down to like good faith versus bad faith, right? And you can have two people doing the exact same thing for wildly different reasons, and that says everything.
Right.
The implications are profound, But Reb Shulem, good guy, I think.
Totally.
Not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but he cares about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Yaakov cares about him,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think your perspective on Reb Shulem is very fair. And the first time we encounter him, it's when Yaakov is leaving from that session that he was in, and the person who's leading the session says,
I thought we discussed this. You coming here and harassing our membership, I don't want to have to call the police again.
It's okay, Leon. It's fine.
Ich voel het nog
And if Yaakov wants to talk to you, he knows where he can find you.
It's okay, Leon. Be okay.
I'm not eens fijn.
Yaakov, you come and get me if this turns into something uncomfortable.
Thank you. Life was great, okay?
Yeah, I'll see you. Call me, yeah?
By the way, the first time we meet him, it's like the ultimate Jewsploitation. You think in the way that we state that, and this is like on all of us, you think that he's the monster. He's Bruce and he's Shark in Jaws, right?
Right.
Totally.
Yeah, originally, it was like the arrival score, like, but what we did is we're bomb as the camera's slowly pushing into him.
Right. And he's like leaning against the thing.
He's smoking that cigarette, and it's just like, it's maybe the coolest shot in the movie. It's just so atmospheric and creepy. And again, like, he is the monster when you first meet him. And that again, it's sort of a misdirect, and but it's worth the misdirect because it's just so cool.
The movie in its content and just as an exercise of the experience of watching it, it really is just towards empathy and towards treating all these people. And, and we'll see that obviously with Mr. Litvak and just learning the story there. And it's listening to people. It's learning who they are. And so that brings us to the next part of the movie where Yaakov actually begins his vigil, his eponymous vigil. And almost immediately he starts hearing strange noises. He starts hearing strange noises coming from the kitchen, and he sees there's a little twitch coming out of the dead body that, we've seen it's covered in a sheet, but it starts moving a little bit. And he eventually investigates in the kitchen, and that's where he catches the first glimpses of this shadowy figure. He begins to see nightmarish imagery and, these very evocative memories. He has that whole instance where he's drinking from a cup and the water turns dark. And it's just a lot of the haunting has begun, basically. A lot of this is not going to be as effective in my description as it will actually experiencing the movie. So I'll gloss over it a little bit, but rest assured, it's very frightening. So he eventually comes across a photo of Mr. Litvak, and he sees his family, and, the shadowy figure is already looming behind there. So he is able to brush all of these aside, and he falls asleep in his chair. And that's when we have this nightmare sequence. We see in his perspective, he remembers and I want to say he's walking with his brother. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. A lot of people think it's his son, but it is indeed his brother.
Just wanted to, I'm happy we have someone to confirm that with. So that was great. So he's walking with his younger brother, and they are stopped in the street by this, group of this crew of anti-Semitic bullies, for lack of a better word. And they end up pushing Yaakov aside, and they torment his young brother. They, play with his payas and just, give him a hard time while we see Yaakov watching fearfully. So Yaakov kind of suddenly wakes up from this, and he goes on to experience some more strange events. We have the lights flickering. We see, more of the twitching. And we'll end this section by saying there's this other great moment where he receives a video where he gets to watch himself while he was taking the nap, and we see a mysterious figure comes over and touches him. So again, lots of creep factor, but I wanted to hear if you guys had any thoughts about the beginning of the haunting and how this was cast.
I mean, the sound design in this movie was like very visceral, like the cracking of the toenails and the crackings of the hands.
That got me.
Oh God, I had to like pause the movie like several times, and I think that's like a mark of a good horror movie where you just kind of need to pause it for a second and take a breath to like soak in all the scariness of it all. But I think, as we progress through the film, like you said, Harry, stuff happens at a more regular cadence and a little bit more creepily. First we sort of see a shadowy figure, and then we see the feet of a shadowy figure, and then it like twitches and a nail cracks off, and then he's drinking water, like you said, and then it turns into this like black, hairy, slimy thing that crawls away. And then it's interesting, JD, before you were talking about misdirects, right? So the video, Harry, I don't know if you mentioned, but the person petting him, it was an old lady's hand. And so like automatically you're like, oh, it's Mrs. Lipfox. She's creeping out, and she's like, she's doing something mysterious. And there's, so we're again led on this sort of what's going on, trying to figure out what's happening. And because we really haven't really talked to Mrs. Lipfox besides her sort of dismissing him and then going upstairs to nap. So, the flashback scene, obviously it weighs heavily on him. He takes pills, and I think at this point in the film, I think he's running low on his pills. So there's like a number of different factors kind of going on here as his psyche is being tested with all this crazy stuff going on.
The flashbacks was my least favorite thing with the brother is my least favorite thing in the movie, but it doesn't matter because it's not my movie anymore, right? Like in the sense of that was always the thing where I feel there's a precision to the movie in every kind of throughout. Once he leaves the footsteps meeting, there is a precision that is like I adore and I'm obsessed with, and I think that just the way Keith and Coop, our DP, staged everything, it's just outrageous. It's eye candy. It's to a point just so immaculate, almost like decadent in the way that it's structured. And I just feel like the flashbacks, I don't know if we ever really nailed, at least to me, I never felt as strong in what his trauma was and how it played out. And we did a lot in sound design to make it feel more dreamlike because, it was it's more verite than the rest of the movie.
Right.
And to me, it's always kind of felt jarring. That said, I think I'm mostly wrong about it. I think that it plays well for other people, so it's irrelevant how I feel. And it moved people who I admire so much. So who cares what I think? But that was always the thing where I was like, oh man, I wish we could go back and do the flashbacks again because I don't feel like we nailed them in the way that we wanted to. And some of that was like a time thing. Some of that was just like the style of it being different. It might not. I just don't know if it was. I didn't feel that it was completely nailed. And this is something that Keith and I would always talk about. And do we reshoot it? But ultimately, I think it works for most people, so it's irrelevant. I'm just giving you the inside baseball. I think the lesson there is sometimes the things that you think are problems aren't actually problems, or even if they are, they're not problems to the extent that you think that they are.
Sure. I can relate totally. Often when I'm doing a video project and I watch it. It's like the craftsman's curse. Anything you work on and you show it to someone else, you only notice the mistakes and what you would have done differently. And I just want to say it's a great film. You don't need me to tell you this, but it works for, for scaring people and everything. But I totally understand this idea that you're only going to notice what's wrong with it.
I think it's a testament to how good the movie is.
Yeah.
Rafi and I truly love that movie in a very unique way. We feel a real ownership of it emotionally. And it was such a great experience working with Keith. We were so simpatico. Keith, Rafi, and I were so. It was the most at that time creatively fulfilling relationship that we'd had with a filmmaker. We really wanted to make the same movie. We were challenging each other in a way that was never content. It was like this loving, creative relationship that was remarkable. And we made again. 95% exactly what we wanted to make. And to me, that was what made the flashback so frustrating was just there's so little I would change about the movie. So little. I watch it and can get lost in it and appreciate it. And so that's why that stuff bugs me. Otherwise, if the movie wasn't as good, I wouldn't, or I didn't think it was as good.
Right.
I wouldn't be bothered by it. But no, I think that there's so much. We tried to have every different type of subgenre of horror in the picture too. So it's you've got gross out horror with the nail and the trans thing. You've got who's there horror with the shadow in the background, which I think is actually also Adam Margot's You have like visceral body horror with which comes later, which we'll get to when he leaves the house. But like we wanted to really jam pack it.
Right.
Which I'm really, every time I watch it, I'm kind of like mesmerized. Like it's like a haunted house. And I've seen the movie so many times, like maybe more than any movie made, or if not more than any movie made. I've seen it so many times and I love watching every time. And I like consistently forget about a scare or two because there're just so many of them.
That's a great segue to a question I actually wanted to ask you about, because you said there's all these different kinds of horror that you're working in there, and spiritual horror and religious possession are such a foundational, I would say, subgenre of horror. Some of the most well-known horror classics are based out of this possession spirituality. Very often it's Catholic possession, and I think you took it in a very different direction by doing it with Jewish. But can you speak to the sort of inspiration that you think the movie takes from some of those movies, and does it try to render it more Jewish, or is it really just taking the keys from that spirituality?
I think for me, I never viewed it as a possession movie because it's not, there's an exorcism at the end, but it's not an exorcism. It's an exorcism of like pain, right? In a sense, it's sort of like fundamentally, in a sense, different, functionally speaking. But I think The Exorcist, the biggest thing that I think of with The Exorcist in terms of the relationship is taking something ancient and setting it in an urban setting. Like The Vigil is one of the few urban horror movies that I felt like I've seen in the past couple of years. Most horror movies in suburbia or small towns. And the fact that or nondescript locations, and the fact that we take place in New York City, in a section of New York City that you almost never see, certainly not in genre movies, that was really exciting to me. Kind of like brick and cold stone in fall, winter weather. That's really interesting to me. I guess that's like a big influence that I think we took. And then of course there's a spiritual component, but it wasn't. I don't know if we were 1408 is a movie that really, I think, inspired certain aspects of the movie, of The Vigil. But that's not a religious horror movie. That's just a Stephen King movie.
I'm curious. Did you film it in Sunset Park, like Borough Park area?
No, I think we did like a scene there. I think we might have done the walking there, but like when Rip Shalom and Yaakov were walking. But primarily, I think it was in Brighton Beach, I want to say.
Okay, gotcha.
It wasn't like an Orthodox neighborhood. We just decorated it.
Got it. Okay, cool.
It's the least authentic thing in the movie.
Right.
It works.
Yeah, no, totally. I bought it. So Mrs. Litvak appears downstairs and she explains to Yaakov that a mazik has been haunting her and her husband his whole life. She adds that she kind of like drove her kids away so that they wouldn't sort of catch it. They wouldn't catch the evilness of this demon. And she points Yaakov towards the basement, where he finds sort of a TV playing a recording of Mr. Litvak and his wife explaining that he caught the mazik at Buchenwald, and when he dies, it'll kind of latch on to the next sort of person who's broken. So the only way to sort of banish it is to like burn its face the first night it appears to you. And so suddenly we get this like slow turnaround, and Yaakov sees the mazik pop up behind him, and he runs upstairs totally scared. He then gets a call from his doctor, who is played awesomely by Fred Malamed. And he gets a call from his doctor, regarding a prescription he wants filled. And he realizes that the voice itself is that of the mazik, who's kind of further tormenting and tricking him and torturing him, he thinks, for letting his brother die. So that's sort of the first introduction of this mazik. I wanted to ask kind of how you settled on the mazik, like sort of the cousin of the Dybbuk, which is a little bit more of a popular demon in sort of the Jewish mythology.
That's Keith. That's all Keith. That is
okay.
The original draft of the script.
Yeah, because I had not heard of it, and there's a lot of the mazikim are like harmful spirits that were said to have been created on the eve of the Sabbath of creation, according to in the Talmud. So I had not heard of them before. So yeah, news to me.
He went to JTS. He's pretty well versed in Jewish history and theology, and so yeah, that was all him.
Nice.
I mean, I think the Gemara and Brachos might talk about it, but Keith came with that in the script. It wasn't like we were like, we don't want to do we want to do this specific. It was something that really I got to give Keith credit for.
Fantastic. And as far as like the design of the creature, which we kind of talk about, we could talk about that later, but like
90% Keith. And I always say 90% because like there's 10% might be like our special effects team, but it was really, Keith is so clued into that stuff and he so understands it.
Yeah. I mean, there was I don't know if it comes up now or later, but like the way that Mrs. Litvak describes, or maybe it's on the video, that like the head is turned around because it's looking back in the past or something. There was something to that extent that kind of plays into this creepy design of the Mazik. Let's talk about it. I'm super curious. For me, I felt like the exposition that we kind of get from the downstairs area kind of like, again, further gets us, peels back the onion another layer. So we kind of know a little bit about what's going on, but now we have sort of our mission of how to like defeat this monster.
10 years ago, I found an inscription in a text by Moshe ben Shandov. It says, the only way to escape the Mazik is to burn its true face the first night it appears. If you do not do this by dawn, it will never leave you.
And we get the sort of all over the walls. There's like scribbles and notes and all sorts of clues that like this has been something that the Mr. Litvak has, preoccupied with, trying to like figure out how to defeat this monster. So yeah,
I don't have so much to say about all of that, unfortunately, because I think all the thematic richness of that is very above board, right? Like I think it's sort of like, for better or for worse, I think it's very, very clear what it represents, and I think it works totally. And this is not a critique. It's just like, it's hard. I think that all the unpacking is better felt than said in a weird way. On that aspect, I will say, fun facts in terms of just the movie magic of it all is that the basement is actually on the second floor of the house. That's movie magic. We just cheated it.
Oh, nice.
And then Liz Tunkel, who is our wonderful production designer, she just did a great movie called Emily the Criminal that came out this year, Bobby Plaza. But she did an incredible job decorating that room with TV. I remember just being there and feeling like, wow, this is such grand work. And because Zach Cooperstein, our intrepid DP, is like makes Gordon Willis look like he's shooting, Hulu TV in terms of how dark he goes.
Right.
I know this about Coop. I'm very into that. But because he does that, you can't see any of her work in that specific room. And I'm like, I wonder, I feel bad because Liz did such a great job. But it totally works. And it's it's just funny to think to me that it's just, that's filmmaking, right? You're working with so many talented, and this is the thing I'll say about The Vigil is it was the first time I felt like we were working with everybody on the movie for the most part was like a craftsperson who really wanted to be there and loved the movie and was doing their best forward. And so inevitably one department would sometimes step on the toe of another department unintentionally, not like
sure.
It was just like when everyone's batting 1,000, there's like a calculus you need to do. Anyway, sure. That nothing to do with the question that you asked. Just
hearing a little bit more about that room is certainly interesting, and it helps paint a broader picture or a better picture. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that room also, and I did pick up on a lot of stuff that was going on there, and that fits into what I was saying at the beginning, that very, for Jews by Jews, where it's just, there's so much attention to detail there. And again, it's not the stock, Pirkei Avot psukim that are kind of just like dribbled in there. But, even the way that, Mr. Litvak is talking about this, and the way that his accent and just the way that it all feels sourced, and just seeing those little snippets, there are those scraps that are kind of all over the board there. Like it gives you the world with, again, it doesn't beat you over the head. You don't get that slow pan to read every single word over it. Right. You pick up on it. It's all there.
Fun fact, Mr. Litvak is played by an actor named Ron Cohen, who is was the husband in real life of Lynn Cohen, who plays Mrs. Litvak.
Oh, wow.
That is cool.
I don't know if she ever got to see the movie, unfortunately. Yeah.
So just speaking of their family, right? That reminds me of that line where she mentions kind of offhand, she says, "You think my children ran away because, they were forced away? Like I drove them away. I made sure that they weren't here," which, just fitting into the whole theme of the movie, to me played like a really interesting case of breaking the aforementioned cycle we were talking about of generational trauma, where it's, she, like, again, in the context of the movie, it's they needed to get out of the house to avoid, the Mazik, but in the broader metaphor of it all, it really is. I mean, it's very tragic that they had to remove themselves from the lives of their children, but it's almost like she recognized that they were so weighed down by their trauma that they experienced from the Holocaust. It was something that, unfortunately, in their lifetime, they were never going to get to break. And again, just stitching the whole story together, that's why they're stuck in the house for the later years of their lives, because they just can't get it out of them. So the only thing they can think to do is to fully cut off their children, to say, you should have no part of our lives. We need you away, as far away as possible, to progress our family beyond this trauma. And I think this weighs into that question that I was posing earlier in the film, where what's the movie suggesting in terms of our relationship as a community, as Jewish people, to our trauma in the past, right? Is the full break, is that the answer? I mean, for their sake, they're fully successful. As far as we know, they're not going to be plagued by the Mazik anymore, but is there also that closeness?
They're not showering,
Yeah, but also, is there closeness that we can get from learning of this trauma and being part of it? Is Yaakov a better success story because he is part of it? Although it's definitely going to traumatize him going forward. So I think that this posits just a really cool counterpoint to the story that we're getting.
Yeah, I think the Litvaks are case study really in what not to do. It destroys them. And then you can't pass judgment on. I mean, they're fictional characters, so I guess you
sure.
Really But for the sake of this conversation, it's hard to judge people, what they went through, how they responded, in an impossible situation. But that said, Yaakov is certainly more of the success story. I mean, not to get ahead of ourselves, but he's not scot-free at the end of the picture.
Right.
No.
But he's leaving the house and he's going to go, get coffee with a girl. That stuff's significant, right? He finds a path forward, which I think is the story of Jews in the aftermath of kind of every calamity that they've experienced. And they're only no good news, but they really pushing them away was some of that obviously is to protect them, and some of that is to wallow in their lot. And I don't know, I think that there is
right.
The movie is positing so much that you could spend hours unpacking kind of a lot of just the lines that Lynn puts out. And there are small things in the movie that Keith does. I mean, for example, when the car goes by, these are just small details we put in, but the car goes by when he's sitting, earlier in the picture, and you hear a train noise and you see barbed wire, and it's hard to make out. There's barbed wire. There's stuff like that throughout the movie. That's just small allusions that were conversation starters and that are extraordinarily loaded. There are no easy answers that the movie's trying to put forward necessarily. I mean, that's kind of the movie. The movie is trying to encapsulate a certain feeling of the Jewish experience, and to that, and to a larger and to some other extent, the human experience. And a lot of that is better. Like I said, a lot of that is more useful when it's digested and felt than explicated.
No question. We definitely recommend our listeners to check out this movie, because as much as you're getting from us, you can't experience it unless you're watching it.
Well, I think JD did give the warning up top that everyone should kind of pause the podcast at the beginning and go check it out.
Of course. Yeah.
So
no, I really agree, but I'm definitely also of the opinion that a great movie can't be spoiled, and that no movie, no matter how much you know about it, will compare to the actual experience of getting to have it wash over you.
JD, you kind of were just talking about leaving the house, and so that's a segue to, I think after discovering all this stuff, and he runs upstairs and he finds Mrs. Litvak, and he's like, "We got to get out of here. We need to leave right away." She says,
"If you run out, the Mazik will make you crawl right back."
So he runs out, puts on his coat and starts running out. And we get, again, these visceral cramping and cracking noises of his bones, his hands, and then his legs. And the further away that he gets from the house, he's at a certain point, he can't walk anymore. He's maybe a block away. And he starts to see the Mazik. I think this is maybe maybe the first or second time that we're sort of seeing it a little bit more clearly each time. First it's a shadow, then it's the outline of it, and now we're kind of seeing it with this sort of backwards turned hands and these very long fingers. So eventually he kind of crawls back to the house, and the closer he gets to the house, his hands and legs work a little bit better. So then he comes back and he goes upstairs to where Mrs. Litvak is waiting, and she hands him a pair of tefillin from her husband and a candle, and she says, "You need to go. You know what you need to do." Like, I think he needs to confront the Mazik. So he goes down after putting on this tefillin. We have this like nicely lit scene of him, sort of wrapping tefillin and putting everything on. And I noticed this move, which is a pro move. I appreciated that for those who are, listening, the sort of way to put on your tefillin, but to like check that it's centered in your head and all that kind of stuff was there. So points awarded. And then also just like, so he makes his way down the hallway and the Mazik is waiting, and also, during this sort of confrontation, we see these like faces popping out of the side of the hallway, and the Mazik's head like spins around very slowly with, again, this crackling noise, and it becomes like an image of his own face. So then he hesitantly takes the candle, but then and plunges it into the Mazik's face, and it burns his face, and we get this sort of screeching, and then he heads downstairs. There we sort of see Ruben's body, and it's sort of like contorting and crackling, and he sits right beside it, and he says Tehillim and prayers and pleading him to let go of his past. And so in a flashback, we see Ruben remembering this sort of flashback of the Holocaust scene from the beginning of the film, and the body quiets down. So now that our monster's defeated and we have our final showdown, I wanted to talk about this before we kind of like wrap up the film. Does that work?
Yeah, sure. It's my favorite part of the movie is that exorcism sequence.
I have a lot to say on this sequence. I want to hear some of your thoughts on it. I definitely want to know how you did the hallway with the faces and the hands sticking out of it.
That was a build, but that wasn't what we wanted to do. Believe initially, we wanted the hallway to have we couldn't afford this because extras and stuff, but we wanted the hallway to be dark, really dark, and in the shadows, legions of Jews in tattered clothing from all throughout history, just all of that surrounding him as he walked. I thought would have been extraordinarily a powerful image. Or extraordinarily, whatever. But we couldn't. Yeah,
Ms. Litvak does say that this, right? She said one of them says that they were able to see the past of this Mazik, and that it's clearly been around for a long time. It's been endlessly tormenting Jews for generations.
Centuries of like kind of Jewish, the withstanding of that experience, and so we couldn't afford that. So the hallway was built, and I think there was like a soft cover. It's people are actually just putting up face. But no, I love that sequence, and that him coming back downstairs, and that even to the point of there's a Jewish star on the sheet over Mr. Litvak's body, and at the end of the movie, it's a Juden star. Hangs into that. It's another small detail that Keith put in. Wow. And it's just like it's so like Michael Yuzorski's score in that is just outrageously good. I mean, impossibly good considering, the parameters and everything. And Michael, Keith did direct an episode of Guillermo del Toro's show on Netflix, and Michael Yuzorski did the score for that episode. But his work on the Vigil is just like unreal. I mean, it's outstanding. And I think he won an award or was nominated for an award in Australia. And I got to see they did a whole orchestra with it. Cool. But I just. It knocks it out of the park, and I tear up when I watch that sequence. It's just so evocative.
Yeah. I mean, I love that, to draw like a more recent comparison, I feel like in Stranger Things, like when they're like gearing up to battle and they're going to fight this demon, everyone's getting their like barbed wire swords and their trash can shields. And we have our hero wrapping tefillin, and like that's their weapon against this Mazik. And I just like love that, like, this is our hero like arming themselves with these tools to kind of like defeat this demon. I just love the way that it was portrayed in this film, and also using the candle as well. I thought the lighting as well was really beautifully shot, and scary as hell obviously, but I think it really worked for me, definitely. And it stuck out well. And the notion of like after defeating the Mazik and sort of seeing the scariest thing that there is in the house, I think when Yaakov goes downstairs and he talks to Mr. Litvak, he's kind of like at peace and definitely just wants to assure him that the job is done and he can rest and he can kind of move on with his life. And he just felt very much at peace at that point.
The tefillin part that you mentioned, that was really one of my favorite moments of the entire movie, because, and we've spoken a lot about this in the past. We did just cover the Fabelmans, and by now, hopefully it's out already, but just if not, I'll give you a glimpse into our conversation about it. We spoke about how a lot of that movie, and have you seen that one, JD? Did you see Fabelmans?
Yeah.
So a lot of that movie, it felt like Sammy's relationship to Judaism was really through the isolation that it engendered in him and the trauma, and that he had a very negative association with his Jewish past. And, he had a lot of means of escaping that, but none of them really involved his Jewishness in a way that I think I was hoping for with that movie. And with this one, I just think after being weighed down with all this trauma of, this Jewish trauma that's weighing him down. And as a character, we know who has progressively been moving away. Instead of the movie kind of rewarding that decision and pushing him even further away, it empowers him with these symbols of, the tefillin, you wrap it on your bicep, right? It's the symbol of Jewish strength, and just says, use these tools of faith, tradition, religion, whatever it is. And that's how you can progress. That's how you can move forward. You're carrying on in a much more positive sense. You're doing that, mitzvah of the tefillin, of carrying. And I think these are the tefillin of Mr. Litvak. So you're taking his legacy, propelling it beyond his death. And for that to just be his like you said, Daniel, his weapon of choice in defeating this Mazik, it was so powerful. It really, by the end of that, he's fully armed and ready. And when he does go downstairs and has that great moment with the body, he's ready. He's not frightened. He's coming in. He's the one who knows what to do. And I want to talk about that scene also for a bit, because that scene is also spectacular.
Couldn't have said it better. Yeah, no, I agree. I love it. And another thing also is when he's done with the exorcism, the candles in the background go out.
Oh, nice.
Interesting.
So many wonderful touches that keep the...
Yeah.
So good.
I loved it.
So the exorcism, which I wanted to just give a little break to weigh in, but now I want to jump in what I loved so much about that scene. And it's obvious. It's everything you were saying. It's what the narrative of this movie always was. The Mazik was this symbol for the repressed trauma from the pain that they were carrying. But even just that subtle moment of, it's not an exorcism where, because normally you're comparing this to The Exorcist, right? It's
possession by a demon, right?
Right, we compel the demon to get out of you. But flipping the language here, when he's not talking to the Mazik, he's talking to Mr. Litvak. He's saying, you have to let go of the past. You have to move past this pain. Again, this is something that this whole lens of trauma, of course, is what the movie was always about. But I definitely had a little bit of a moment where I was like, oh, it wasn't really the Mazik. It was the pain he has to let go on. And just the way that that's communicated with that flip of language, I just thought was so effective. And, he ultimately calms down. His body goes from contorting wildly to just settling peacefully. And it's this really powerful and I would say very strongly Jewish moment of learning to move on from the pain, some of the pain of the past.
I mean, it's Keith and I talked about this a bit. Like, Judaism doesn't have it's monotheistic in a way that, like, although people might consider Christianity monotheistic, there are like Christianity, there are other powers, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. In Judaism, we recognize the world like there's only God, right? There's nothing that works against God, really, right? So even the antagonist in the movie ostensibly is doing something for it's not an opposing figure. It's not like there's no idea of like God versus the devil. All right. It's like there is God and everything serves God. And so therefore this thing is ultimately wants Yaakov to win. Right. That's kind of like that's again, and not this doesn't necessarily need to affect your enjoyment or appreciation of the movie. And we're getting into kind of theology here, as David Sachs would say, like there's only God, right? And so I would say, there's no, to your point, it's not him trying to, it's someone finding a way to excise themselves, right? Exactly. Like in Judaism, it's not like you don't look at your Yetzer Hara, we call it the evil inclination, right? You don't look at it as something that is trying to hurt you to get back at your creator. You look at something that's you trying to get you to fall so that you can not fall and grow and have more strength for the experience of having overcome whatever, bad impulses you may have. And so, it's implicitly, in a sense, more rewarding and hopeful. And so that's why, like, it's complicated. We talked about, like, well, should there be like that final, like, we'll have the, like, Jason Voorhees coming out of the lake at the end of Friday the 13th, but it's like, well, that's not really, and we do have something sort of like that at the end, but that's not, I don't, that's a big scare to the point there's no stinger or anything. It's more just like, in a sense, it's its own hopefulness. It's because it's not being disingenuous. It's like when Yaakov defeats this thing, it's not like there are no challenges in his life anymore, but he can live with the challenges. He understands challenges, and he understands kind of the benefit that this experience has afforded him.
I got the sense, like, after hearing what you're saying, like, that the Mazik, as we said, like, this traditional figure, is mischievous. And, like, so are we to understand then that this Mazik was just kind of like having a laugh and kind of goofing around with him and did not mean to, like, cause him any sort of, like, harm? No. Okay.
I'm saying is it's not really mischievous. It's mischievous in the sense that it's trying to push his buttons.
Yes.
It's not, but I think that the goal of the movie is the outcome of the movie.
Right.
To a certain extent, like, it's feeding on pain because Mr. Litvak is allowing it to feed on pain.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Right? The moment he is willing to let go of that pain, it will let go of him. So, and then it latches onto Yaakov, yes, but it latches onto Yaakov because Yaakov's not done yet. Like, his trauma's not over. He's working through it.
Right.
And as long as he works through it, it will tail him. But it'll tail him a block away.
Right. That's a good distinction of, like, that this Mazik does feed on, like, grief and sadness and things like that. And so as he kind of, like, works through a lot of the pain, the Mazik is like, all right, I'm done here. And then, pieces out.
And I think this answers some of the questions that I say we, but I think I've been posing them and answering them throughout, but just of
That's
what
fair.
That relationship, but what your relationship should be. And that, stinger, we're calling it at the end, where the Mazik is trailing him. It's not that, he's about to be haunted, right? It's not that Jason popping up out of the lake. It's him cultivating a positive relationship with his past, one that's he's not weighed down by it. His bones aren't getting crushed. He's not being pulled back inside. He can go on and move with his life, but he's suffered from a very real trauma involving his brother who died. And I don't think the answer is supposed to be, forget about him and move on, cut all your ties with your past. Like maybe his, like the person in the beginning, the one who was leading the session in the beginning would tell him, the footsteps leader in the beginning would tell him, stop hanging out with Reb Shulem, ignore him. That's not the answer. It's not that you should cut everything off completely. It's that it's learning to live with it. It's learning to move forward while maintaining that relationship with the past. And I'll use this just to set up the last couple beats of the movie, because the movie really just ends the Chevra Kadisha, that group of Jews who come to relieve him after his shomer, after his watching the body come in and take over for the body. And he has one final conversation with Reb Shulem where he says to him, Yaakov, I knew that would be a good experience for you. Do you want to come with me to Shachris, to morning prayers, to davening? And he declines. And this is what I wanted to call out, what I'm just sort of tying to that last point. But he doesn't say, no, I'm done with this forever. Right. He says, not today. Maybe he'll come back in the future. Maybe he'll daven. Maybe he'll show up to Shachris one time. But for today, the healthy thing for him is to just, he's exercised his demon, so to speak. He's, carrying some of that with him. He's going to walk away. He's going to go for coffee, but his past is not gone. His past will always be a part of him. And just to actually finish the movie, he ends up walking away. And like we've been saying a couple of times, we see the Mazik sort of trailing him, but he walks out into the distance.
A very blurry Mazik, which is how we kind of experience the Mazik most of the film, is this sort of like blurry presence. Now, is the Mazik going to find someone else, or is the Mazik kind of like sticking with Yaakov?
It's following Yaakov, I think. I mean, that's how we feel.
Got it. Okay.
First of all, in Yaakov's defense, he did already daven Shachris. Okay, even be a Chidus, but he had a few shots to come.
That's great to point out.
But no, we wanted to make something that felt real and raw and honest and not patronizing. And that felt like the best. I believe that's how that character is walking away from that experience. Because Yaakov's he's on a path, right? He's working through, he's working through feelings, but he's not arbitrarily bitter. Because he didn't, he's having an existential crisis, but it's not, or he's been having an existential crisis, but it has more to do with him than a projection on the outside world, if that makes any sense. So it's there's a nuance to the experience.
That was our discussion of the film, The Vigil. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll rate the film on a scale of 1 to 5 Jewish stars. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are here with JD Lifshitz to discuss the film The Vigil. At this time, we're going to be rating the film on a scale of 1 to 5 stars of David. We'll take a look at things like cast and crew, content, and themes. You know me and my rubrics, Harry. You know, is there a kippah? Is there a davening? Is there a rabbi? I think we got all of those things. As far as like the cast, you know, the director, Keith Thomas, is Jewish. Our stars, Dave Davis, Menashe Lustig, Lynn Cohen, and Malky Goldman.
I'm not sure if Menashe is Jewish.
Yeah. Not sure.
I would bet he is.
Yeah. And a quick shout out to the movie Menashe by Josh Weinstein. If anyone hasn't checked that out, that's a great film. Also,
Menashe is a great actor. Really does a phenomenal job in both films.
Really is.
Yeah, it's
very Jewish.
Very Jewish. So the cast and the crew very Jewish. The content very Jewish. The themes very Jewish. A lot to say. I mean, or I would say, you know, like it's so Jewish. Definitely, it takes place in this Jewish world. I'm struggling to find like what the non-Jewishness of it all is, but you know, I'm having a very hard time. I want to hear what you all have to say, because like, you know, for me, it's like it's a pretty straight rating. But I'm curious to know, JD, was there anything? And how would you rate your film?
I think it's a 10 out of 10. I know it's normally 5, but I feel like that's too low for how good the movie is. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I don't think there's anything like particularly now. I don't know if there's a more Jewish movie that's ever been made.
All right.
Just in terms of like selling Yiddish, dude. Like, how could you make a more Jewish movie?
Right.
I really don't know how to do it.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that like, you know, the marrying of like a horror movie in this Jewish world. It's that obviously, you know this, but you know, it's not traditionally what we would think of as like a Jewish film. And I think that makes it sort of, well, the only way it could be like a more Jewish film if it was like, I don't know. It's hard. I'm struggling.
Wow, it's like about a Jewish thing starring.
Right. But I
really don't know. By the way, this movie came out in Europe theatrically the same time as American Pickle, which was theatrically released in Europe. And I just think of like how anti-Semitic I would be if like I was like living in France or the UK, and I went to, which at the time was part of Europe, and I went to the theater and I got 2 movies about ultra-Orthodox Jews. Like,
right.
How many, you know, it's all I'm saying is I think it's enough to make anybody a little suspicious. So I'm happy that we didn't, that our both my movie and Brandon Trost's movie didn't start any trouble.
Right. No, that's good for sure. Harry, what do you think?
I think this is impossible to argue one of the most Jewish movies we've seen, but I think it's for some different reasons that, you know, we haven't always encountered. And a lot of that is some of the things that you were outlining in the beginning, JD, just talking about the way that some other quote unquote Jewish movies, and we've seen a couple of them, they really feel like they're pandering to this sort of Jewish crowd. They come from this perspective that I think feels often unfamiliar with the intricacies of it. And clearly they hired, you know, a lot of these movies, some consultants to familiarize themselves with some beats of it, but it's sometimes the Jewishness can be a vessel to tell the story. Sometimes it can be the context to tell the story. I really got the read when I was watching this movie that this was a movie that only could have been done by someone who was, you know, passionately Jewish, who understood that and told a story that doesn't sound like, you know, one of the big criticisms for a lot of Hollywood screenplays is when, you know, some people try to write roles for women, but what they'll do is they'll take a movie that was written for a man and then, you know, flip the name from, you know, a man's name to a woman's name and then just kind of recast it. And you know, for various reasons, people will argue that doesn't feel like it was actually written for a woman with a woman in mind in a way that, you know, someone would experience. And I just think I felt like I was experiencing that as a Jewish person watching a lot of these movies and just feeling this one where I was just like, this is not just no one's ever told a Hasidic horror movie. Let's try to, you know, take the classic Catholic spiritual horror and put it in the Jewish world. This built off of very real, you know, trauma that's experienced in the Jewish world, very real experiences. We were talking about, you know, that experience with the footsteps and, you know, we all bonded over just having the Rebbe that's kind of on top of you. And just every beat of this movie to me just felt like I said I would say it a couple of times, but, you know, by Jews for Jews in a very real way. So I'll start us off on what I think will be a pretty unanimous ranking, but I'm going to give this 5 out of 5 Jewish stars. I just think, but in a very exciting way. I was watching this and I was just like, yes. And we didn't even mention it. The movie ends with a great needle drop. There's a Zusha song that plays at the end, which was just, for me, that was the cap on top of it. And I was just like, this movie was for me. It gets me. And I loved it. I really have.
My partner, Rafi. That was Rafi who picked that song.
It was great song. Great moment.
So 5 out of 5 for you, Harry, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
And JD, where did you come in? I forget. I
think it was 10.
I think 10. This is the life hack to getting the 5 stars on the podcast. Like, you got to just pick your own movie. 5 stars.
There you go. Great, love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm here with you, Harry. I think, one of the things that I liked about it more is it felt kind of like a documentary in some ways, where it's just like not taking a lot of hard stances on. Like you said, JD, too, like not judging things one way or another. It's just this is this person's experience and this is how this person lives. And let's just, I don't know. I felt that it was like respectfully and authentically portraying what life is like for several characters in that orbit. The aging person, the Holocaust survivor, the person like Menashe, who's kind of like, a bit more embedded in the community and active in it. And then you have someone like Yaakov, who's kind of like on the outskirts of it. And the whole ecosystem that was built and the whole world that was built felt very authentic to me. So I'm also going to go 5 stars. So we have a 10 and a 5 and a 5. So I feel like that's, pretty solid showing for the Vigil here on Jews on Film. JD Lifshitz, thank you so much for being on Jews on Film. Really appreciate you taking the time to discuss the Vigil. I wanted to ask, if there's anything you'd like to plug or promote.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to warn your audience. This is going to be an exclusive Jews on Film break. By the time it airs, hopefully it'll have been announced and I won't get in trouble. But for you guys, for the audience of 2 that I'm in front of right now, this is an exclusive break, essentially. So you can even announce it as an exclusive break because it is an exclusive break. It's just coming out after it's an exclusive. So Quentin Tarantino is very graciously, essentially theatrically releasing the film in January at the New Beverly Cinema, which is his theater in Los Angeles.
Very cool.
On film, actual film, not digital. So you will be able to, and the last time, the film was bought for a theatrical release by Blumhouse, and then COVID happened and it didn't get that release and it ended up on Hulu. And so, the last time I saw the movie with a real audience in a theater was at the Toronto Film Festival. So this is extremely cool. The first screen will be January 7th. It'll be every Saturday night in January. But the first screen will be January 7th, and Mike Flanagan, the creator of Haunting of Hill House on Netflix and many other hit programs, or several other shows for Netflix, and director of quite a few movies. He will be doing the first Q&A. We're hoping to have guests for all the screenings, but it'll be director in attendance and a guest moderator in attendance at every screening, hopefully, again, starting with Mike Flanagan. So please, everybody come on down to the New Beverly Cinema, the best theater certainly in the United States, if not the world. Certainly our favorite theater, a Bold Light favorite theater, and see the theatrical re-release of the picture. The first time it'll be screened for an audience on 35 millimeter, and courtesy of the director of my favorite Jewish movie of all time, Inglourious Basterds, and probably my favorite movie of all time as well. So yes, very, very excited about this.
Awesome. And any exciting movies coming out soon that you'd want to make our listeners?
Becky 2, but there's no release date yet. But yeah, okay. Becky 2 is probably the next release. It's not the most recent thing we've shot, but it's the one that's probably going to come out first.
Sweet. Okay. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely have some links in our show notes for everyone to check out a lot of the past work. And for anyone who hasn't gotten the hint already, we should definitely check out The Vigil because it is a scary movie. Yeah, go ahead.
Fun fact. Lou Wilson, star of Becky, Jewish, surprisingly Jewish.
Nice.
Yeah. Very, very, it's always fun when you find out someone you had no idea. But Lou Wilson indeed is Jewish.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. Harry, it is Thursday night. I know I'm putting you on blast here. Any recipes to plug? No. JD, if you listen before, sometimes Harry has graced us with awesome like schnitzel recipes, like adding the honey to the schnitzel. Sorry to blow up your spot, Harry, but he's a great cook, and so I just want to, that is your art, Harry. You know what I'm saying? In addition to this podcast, Harry makes a mean schnitzel. So
yeah, podcast comes second.
Exactly. Well, thank you everyone for listening this far to Jews on Film. We really appreciate it. We're kind of winding down our year, but we wanted to thank everyone for listening, and make sure to check us out on all our social medias. We're on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, on all the things, all the platforms. Yeah, thanks so much for listening, everyone, and we will see you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Harry Ottensasser and Daniel Zana. Daniel and Harry edited this episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram @JewsOnFilm and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.